Ben Shapiro challenged statements I've made that 6 billion Asians in the year 2050 or 2060 should not aspire to live like Europeans and Americans. So let me clarify what I actually meant. What I meant by that is anyone who understands the science will be aware that the economic model of the West, which has predominated the world for the last 100 years, is essentially wasteful. If it wasn't wasteful, we wouldn't have the greenhouse gas phenomena, we wouldn't have the climate change issues, we wouldn't have the plastic waste scourge that we are confronted with. So we all know that the economic model is essentially broken in terms of its wastefulness. So what I meant by that is, in the world's most populated part of the region, we need to find more creative ways to essentially address the need to uplift hundreds of millions, even billions of people out of poverty, but be less wasteful and make sure that we meet their basic rights without destroying the planet. That's what I meant. He also challenged the fundamental argument in my book, The Sustainable State, that whilst markets are important, free markets are not going to be able to address the extent and the extreme nature of the existential threats we face. So I suppose, being American, his notion was any suggestion that the state would intervene in the market would be seen as some sort of socialist conspiracy, etc. That is not the point I was making. The point I was trying to make is that in the most crowded part of the world, and including places like Africa, we will need different ways of allowing the market to operate. Markets will operate, but they will operate within rules. And those rules will essentially be those that we have to formulate given the nature of the existential threats. So the state and the markets will need to work together. But let's face it, markets don't make rules for public good. The only place that those rules can be made for public good and common good is through the institutions of the society. You can call it the state, you can call it the government, you can call it whatever you want. But markets cannot and should not be allowed to make the rules. And that's what I've argued in the book. He goes on to suggest that my approach is to essentially enforce lower living standards on the billions of people in the developing world by allowing governments to collude with corporations to do this. This is the complete opposite of what I've argued. In fact, on the other hand, some people have accused me of entirely the opposite, of suggesting that in fact I am anti-corporation and pro-government oppression or dominance in terms of the economy. What I'm actually talking about is that in the large developing countries of the world, governments will need to ensure that they allow corporations to thrive, but they do not allow them to have the free ride they have, which is the basis for free market capitalism, which has got us into the mess that even in the United States and in Europe, most people understand. Most regulations in the world are not to curb multinational companies from providing to the sort of creation of prosperity, but to make sure that the free ride on resources, the externalization of costs, the protection of public good is in the hands of the institutions of the state. So we need to have strong states, and strong states cooperate well with large corporations, who are willing to essentially march into the 21st century rather than stay in the 20th or 19th century when it's a free ride on everything, including the resources in our part of the world. This is very interesting. I understand it coming from a US conservative commentator. In the United States, as we all know, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, there are elements of large segments of the population who are paranoid about the state. But if you come to countries like China and India, which represent 40% of the world's population, I can assure you that government policies are not influenced, not one iota, by what happens at the World Economic Forum. They come to the World Economic Forum to share what they want to do. They share their ideas. They seek to embrace a globalized world, but their policies are theirs, and the World Economic Forum's elites have no say in these large countries which make up the majority of the world. Not in China, not in Indonesia, not in India, not in Nigeria. So he should be very careful not to conflate what is happening in the United States, where there are conspiracies about elites taking over, and what's happening in the rest of the world. That is not to say that there is a real tension and a fear among many in the world that large corporations are perhaps too influential, they have too much power. But it's the role of the government, which therefore, reaffirms my position. If the state is strong, it provides the check and balances. If it's weak, captured by elites, be it from corporations or elites within their own countries, then it's not able to do what it's meant to do, which is to protect public and private goods. What I'd like to do really is to invite Ben Shapiro to come to our part of the world so that he understands. I'm flattered, I'm not sure if that's the right word, but that he picked up on some of the things I said, particularly the things that I've written in my book about the sustainable state, and used it to analyze or reaffirm some of the concerns he has, but which I've suggested are really American concerns, not global concerns. So I'd like to invite Ben Shapiro out to Asia. We could meet in Hong Kong. No communists, I assure you. Or we can meet in Malaysia. No Islamic fundamentalists. And we could have a friendly conversation. We don't have to be confrontational, as is the norm in US television. And we can discuss, become friends, and find solutions to the things he's concerned about, the things we're all concerned about. So, Mr. Shapiro, fly over. We'll talk.